Hello everyone. The topic we're going to understand and learn about today is Panipat Syndrome. Now we're going to understand this from the perspective of your political science and international relations optional exam. It has become relevant for your exam because it is now part of the Jaishankar Doctrine for Indian foreign policy. With regards to your PSAR syllabus, it falls under paper 2, India and the World. It has relevance for Indian foreign policy, India and the nuclear question, and the recent developments in Indian foreign policy. Now, the first thing that you need to know is what is Panipat Syndrome. Now, this term was coined by Jasjit Singh, former Air Commodore of the Indian Air Force. He had coined the term in the 90s itself. So it has been 35 years when this term has entered into India's strategic thinking and is used quite often in international relations, defense studies, and the overall strategic thinking or strategic culture of India. To understand this, you need to first know what happened during the battles of Panipat. You understand there were 3 battles of Panipat. The first battle of Panipat between Babur and Lodi. The second battle of Panipat between Hemu and Akbar. The third battle of Panipat between the Maratha Empire and the Durrani Empire. Now, Jasjit Singh gives a reference to the first battle of Panipat. Now, what had happened is that Babur started out from Kabul in 1504. He ransacked Lahore in 1524 and he burned Lahore for 2 days. And then the Battle of Panipat happened between Babur and the Lodis in 1526. Now, what Jasjit Singh has said is that the Indian kingdoms or the Indian kings, especially from the medieval period till date, wait for the enemy to enter into our territory and then fight them. This has happened in the first battle of Panipat, whereby Lodi waited for Babur to leave Kabul, then reach Lahore, and then he only fought Babur at the outskirts of his 2 main important cities, Delhi and Agra, and he fought him in Panipat. Now, with reference to the Battle of Panipat, what has happened? That all the Indian kingdoms or the kingdoms that controlled Delhi lost. Whether it was the Lodis, whether it was Hemu, whether it was the Maratha Empire. Why? Because all of us, or all the Indian kingdoms, waited for the enemy to enter into Indian territory and then fight them at the border itself, rather than taking the fight to the enemy in their own territory. This is what Sitaram Goel has also talked about, India's famous historian, in 1995. He has said that Panipat mentality is waiting for the invader till he reached a particular field of battle. It has been a traditional taboo to go out and destroy the aggressor in his own homeland. With reference to this, he gives the example of Chandragupta Maurya and India's most famous strategic thinker, Kautilya. He said Kautilya first went to the Nanda Empire and said that the Yavanas or the Indo-Greeks threaten the Indus Valley and threaten the Yamuna Ganga Valley, whereby they can conquer the whole of the Indian subcontinent. And for this, you need to go and fight them. The Nanda Empire, as per the story, did not listen to him. So he trained Chandragupta Maurya. And Chandragupta Maurya then went on to defeat the Indo-Greeks within Afghanistan, within their controlled kingdoms, within their territory. And from Afghanistan up till Bengal, he established his empire, or the Mauryan Empire. The term Panipat mentality was first used by Sitaram Goel. The official term is actually Panipat Syndrome. It is also the term that has been used by Dr. Jaishankar also. The term Panipat mentality has recently been made famous. The term Panipat mentality has recently been made famous by Shashank Mattu also. But officially, the term Panipat Syndrome is the one that is used, but you can use either of them, it would be fine. In reference to this, Jasjit Singh has said in the 1990s, that what was happening during that time in the 1990s is that in 1994, India had successfully tested the Agni 3 missile system. Now, the Indian government at that time, in 1996, decided that India will establish the Agni missile system further when the security environment is as such that India requires the Agni missile system. So basically, there was an unofficial halt to the development of the Agni missile system in India. Now, Jasjit Singh said that this type of decision making is a form of Panipat mentality. You are waiting for the enemy to develop their missiles and then to attack India, and then you'll develop your own missile system. He says that it takes time to develop, it takes time to test, and it takes time to implement the Agni missile system. And it cannot be done when the threat is on our border, when the enemy is threatening us right at the border, and we have to go and fight them. This he considered as Panipat mentality. In reference to this, he gave several points as to what are Panipat Syndrome, or what are the aspects of Panipat Syndrome. First is the failure to see a nascent threat, that you're not able to see that the threat is building up. This is what Kautilya saw with regards to the Indo-Greek, that they, when they have conquered Afghanistan, when they have conquered the northwest frontier, it is likely that they might conquer the Indus Valley and the Ganga-Yamuna Valley and the Indian subcontinent as a whole. The second aspect he highlights is that there is a lack of strategic thinking. The third aspect he highlights is lack of innovation and preparedness. Now, with regards to first battle of Panipat, an important aspect is that Babur had gunpowder and Lodhis didn't. In addition to this, the Lodhis did not have advanced weaponry as compared to what Babur had. He uses the same analogy or the same point in reference to the Agni missile system. He says that by halting or by stopping the development of the Agni missile system, you are going to have a lack of innovation and preparedness when the threat is at our border. He makes it an analogy between the first battle of Panipat and what was happening in the 1990s. The last point he says is that we allow the enemy to enter deep into our territory rather than neutralizing it at the border or neutralizing the enemy in their own territory. So we wait, we become defensive, let them come and then we'll fight them. This has happened within medieval India. This continues to happen in today's India also. This is basically the origin of the Panipat Syndrome given by Jasjit Singh in the 90s. This particular thought of Panipat Syndrome was evolved by K. Subrahmanyam to incorporate the strategic thinking in independent India. K. Subrahmanyam, one of India's most famous strategic thinker, former IAS officer, and father of India's current External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar. He has said that one of the reasons why India continues to suffer from Panipat Syndrome, especially post-independent India, is because we do not carry out regular periodic assessment of security threats. He says we do not or are not looking for threats that might emerge in 5 years from now, in 10 years from now. And because we don't look for the threats that can emerge, we're not prepared for them. So he says one of the symptoms of Panipat mentality, one of the symptoms of Panipat mentality is, or Panipat Syndrome, is not carrying out regular assessment of security threats. He gives three main examples for this. He gives the example of the 1948 war, the 1965 war, and the 1971 war. He says when the 1948 war happened and when the Pakistanis supported the tribals to enter into POK and then tried to attempt to enter into Jammu and Kashmir, India did not see it coming initially. When the 1965 war happened, it was a surprise attack on India, on India's borders. During the 1971 war, the escalation to which the Bangladesh conflict evolved into, that India did not see it coming. The influx of refugees that came from Bangladesh, that India did not see coming. So this, he gives as 3 examples of not having periodic assessment of security threats that can emerge, whether it emerges quickly, like what happened in the 1971 war, or it happens gradually over time. This tradition of not anticipating the threat in advance, not being prepared to meet it, and attempt to counter it after it has assumed serious proportion is the Panipat Syndrome. Now, this is a line given by K. Subrahmanyam. You can use it specifically within your answer if such a question does come up in PSIR or a related question does come up in PSIR. Apart from this, the idea of Panipat Syndrome has now continuously evolved over time by several thinkers. You have Maruf Raza, one of India's leading strategic thinker. He has approached Panipat Syndrome in terms of liberal versus realism. He has said that the current realist thought in India is that they want to take the fight to the enemy. They want to be proactive. But what is happening is that the liberal rationalist approach within India in policy making, whether it's the bureaucracy, whether it's the politicians, whether it's the defense class, he includes all of them within this. They are making sure that India continues to suffer from the Panipat Syndrome because they want to be defensive. They don't want to escalate the situation. They don't want India to seem aggressive in the global stage. And because of this, India continues to remain defensive. India continues to wait for the enemy to attack us or threaten us and then be retaliatory in nature. Whereas the realists want to be proactive. You can frame this as to what happened in the 90s. The Indian policymakers or the Indian government at that time wanted to halt the Agni missile system, which was they did not want to seem aggressive. They did not want to escalate the situation. They wanted a certain kind of image in the global arena. Whereas realists like Jasjit Singh said that this is a symptom of Panipat mentality. It is a symptom of Panipat Syndrome. That you are waiting for the enemy to develop their missile system, and then India, if the security environment allows, then will develop the Agni missile system. Whereas Pakistan, in 1993, officially by its own claims, said that it has a similar system to the Agni missile system or the Agni 3 missile system. China already had improved missile system than India during that same period of time. So the threat was already there. The wait for the threat to actually attack India was Panipat mentality. Gurmeet Kanwal, or Brigadier Gurmeet Kanwal, has also said that India must set aside its passive, reactive policies plagued by the Panipat Syndrome and instead flex its muscles when it needs to. He takes forward the similar ideas that K. Subrahmanyam has given. K. Subrahmanyam gave 3 examples. He adds one more, which is Kargil. That during Kargil, because we did not do periodic threat assessments properly, we were taken by surprise when the Pakistanis occupied those peaks. Apart from this, Gurmeet Kanwal makes a strong assertion that Panipat Syndrome is one of the leading causes or one of the reasons as to why India does not have an effective strategic culture. One of the reasons as to why India does not have an effective strategic culture. And he frames this because India continues to seek refuge in moral high grounds. He says India is not able to develop an effective strategic culture because we suffer from Panipat Syndrome. And we suffer from Panipat Syndrome because we continuously take a moral high ground. And he gives 3 examples for this. He gives first the example of the 1948 war. What had happened in the 1948 war? The Indian army had repulsed the Pakistani tribals up till Srinagar, and they were willing to go into Muzaffarabad to completely liberate Pakistan occupied Kashmir. But what happened during that time? India went to the United Nations or the United Nations Security Council, and it halted the movement or the forward movement of the Indian troops within Jammu and Kashmir. And till date, that region of India continues to be with Pakistan. The second example he gives is of Tibet. He says that when India gave a suzerain recognition to Tibet as a part of China, India should have demanded from China a settlement of the borders. The third example that he gives is of the United Nations Security Council seat. He says that during the 50s, when the People's Republic of China was offered the seat of China in the United Nations Security Council, and India gave its support to having the People's Republic of China get this Chinese seat, India should have asked the leaders of the PRC at that time that they support India also for a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. Because what is happening today, you have 4 of the 5 permanent members, US, UK, Russia, and France, supporting India for a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council, at least in words. But who is the opposing member? China. And he says at that time, India only gave one-way negotiation, that we supported them. We should have asked for their support for the same thing in return. You have Lieutenant General B.S. Nagal, who frames the Panipat Syndrome in reference to India's no first use policy. Now, briefly, under India's no first use policy, India will not be the first country to use nuclear weapons. India will use nuclear weapons if it is attacked by nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, or biological weapons, either on Indian territory or against the Indian armed forces. He has said this is, or he has reference to, that this is also a symptom of Panipat mentality. You're waiting for the enemy to drop a nuclear bomb on Delhi, Bombay, or any other part of India, and then you'll react. You're waiting for the enemy to take the offensive, and then you will defend yourself, or then you will retaliate. So this is an important critique to the no first use policy. Brahma Chellaney, an important strategic thinker in India, he has also said that Panipat Syndrome, which was the cause of India's decline for centuries, India still waits for the enemy to seize the initiative and seeks to fight on Indian territory on terms set by the adversary, whereby we wait for the enemy to come into India, initiate a war against us, and then will retaliate even on Indian territory. He frames this in reference to indirect war. He says that India continues to be a victim of indirect war, one of the few nations among the major powers or any country across the world to continue to suffer from this. India knows that the terrorist camps are in POK. The terrorist camps are supported by Pakistan. Yet, we continue to only retaliate when there is a terrorist attack against India, whether it was 26/11, whether it was Pathankot, whether it was the Uri attack. Indian action have been retaliatory whenever terrorist attacks are done against India. Rather than us taking the fight to the enemy and destroying such camps, we wait for the enemy to come into our territory, attack us, and then he'll retaliate in smaller measures equally. Now we come to Dr. Jaishankar. Within his book, The India Way, he referenced Panipat Syndrome. He says, Panipat Syndrome, which means that living in ignorance until the enemy has actually arrived at your gates, should be changed. He says, it has been our history to allow events to come upon us and not anticipate or analyze them. This is a form of Panipat Syndrome where we saw invading forces enter the Indian heartland, Delhi, for decisive battles. The 3 battles of Panipat he is referring to. This is what is important. He has said that India is undergoing a shift in its strategic thinking, that we're moving away from Panipat Syndrome, or Panipat Syndrome inflicting India's strategic thinking. In reference to this, C.Raja Mohan has said that we are obviously being weighed down by Panipat Syndrome to a passive and reactive defense, similar to what every other strategic thinker have also said. He has said that we're seeing the birth of an active strategy that wants to go beyond the borders and attack the source of the threat. This active strategy he referenced with Balakot strike. He gives the example of Ajit Doval, or the strategy that came up during that time, which is much more closer to the ideas given by Ajit Doval, that is of offensive deterrence. Offensive deterrence. Offensive deterrence. It means deterrence by punishment. Deterrence by punishment. Whereby, if you attack us, we're going to attack you back. So it happened in the surgical strikes, it happened in the Balakot strikes. Now, it is not the level of strike or the retaliation that would happen. See, continuously, you can see that we're again retaliating. The terrorist attack happens against us and then we retaliate. It is about the measure. Today, it might be a surgical strike. It might be a Balakot strike. Tomorrow, the level can be increased. The deterrence by punishment, the level of punishment can change over time. And this is what Dr. Jaishankar has referred to as a change in policy. And this is what C.Raja Mohan refers to when he talks about the active strategy in reference to Balakot and the idea of offensive deterrence given by Ajit Doval. Now, if we come back to your political science and international relations optional, there have been previous year questions. This one asked in 2018. It asked, India is often said to have a rich strategic culture. Discuss. Now, within this question, can you refer to Panipat Syndrome? Yes. You can refer to the idea given by Gurmeet Kanwal, who has said that one of the reasons India lacks a strategic culture is because India suffers from Panipat Syndrome. You can also take the example of these 2 questions asked in 2019 and 2020 in reference to India's no first use policy. In both of these, you can use the idea of Panipat Syndrome as a critique of India's no first use policy. Now, if these 2 questions on no first use policy had been asked in your GS mains examination, it would have been fine to not use Panipat Syndrome. But because this is PSIR, in which you have to use certain concepts, certain thinkers that are prevalent within this field, Panipat Syndrome becomes significant. I hope you have understood about Panipat Syndrome, its origin, its evolution, its contemporary thinking, and how it falls in your political science exam syllabus, and how can you use it to answer your previous year questions, at least of the 5 years. With this, I say thank you. And if you have any doubt, you can email me. The email is given below in the description, or you can even come and meet me at the Bengaluru branch of Rouse IAS. So, take care, everyone.